following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Thank you, Tally Olson. We are back. Golenbock University with Peter Golenbock, the professor. I'm Ralph Tycho with the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network, and the professor is here. Peter, how are you, sir?
I'm just fine on this beautiful St. Petersburg, Florida day. Just lovely.
Oh, you must be reveling in it while most of the rest of us are mired in winter. I'm in California, so I'm not mired at all, but it's New York, what is it, 15 last week, something to that, in that area.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Exactly right.
Glad our old bones are getting a little warmth. How about that? Peter, we're expecting a guest. He's an old friend of yours and the newest podcaster on the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network, Randy Lerch. He should be with us shortly. But I'd like to talk about a book that you announced for publication earlier in the week on Facebook, and it's a book that you're co-writing. Tell us about it, Peter.
Yeah, it's called American Nero, and I wrote it with Richard Painter, who you may know from his appearances on MSNBC and CNN, and he has 750,000 tweet followers, which is quite wonderful.
Now, tweet, that's new to you, Peter. I don't think you're a tweeter. I know.
No, I have about 1,000 tweet followers, though. I have not begun to start tweeting.
Okay.
But we put our heads together, and we thought that it would make a very interesting book to tell the history of the rule of law and how it's been broken even since before the country was founded. Really,
okay,
one of the
let
very
me just say we've been joined by our guest Randy Lerch, and Randy, how are you, sir?
I'm doing great, Ralph. Nice to hear your voice, and I've been listening in, and I want to say hi, Peter. Howdy, old friend.
How you doing, my boy?
I'm doing great now. I'm really thrilled to be able to be on your show.
We're thrilled to have you, believe me. Randy was one of our stars with the St. Pete Pelicans in the 1989-1990 season, where the Pelicans were the champions, the only champions of the Senior Professional Baseball League. And it was one of the great 4 months of my life. It was so fabulous. We'll talk about that in just a second. Ralph, you want to finish plugging my new book? Yeah. So Painter and I, Richard and I, decided that we would write a history of the breaking of the rule of law in America, starting with the Salem witch trials, which was so nutty. It was unbelievable. You had people who could accuse people of, crazy things, and as a result of that, they would end up, hanging them for being witches. You talk about fake news. I mean, that was the beginning of it. And so we go from Washington all the way to Trump. We talk about some of the ghastly things that have happened in America. The McCarthy hearings would go back to the Red Scare of 1919. President Roosevelt putting the Japanese in internment camps. It's an incredible series of various breakings of the rule of law, and of course we focus on what Trump has done in the last 3 years. It's quite amazing, actually, and the most amazing part of it is that the Republicans in the Senate have allowed him to get away with it. That's really the most amazing thing. Anyhow, The book will be out
Peter,
March 24th.
How did it come that you got together with Mr. Painter to write this?
Michael Wright, the agent, represented both of us, and he put us together.
Beautiful.
Which is how these things usually work.
How does a writing partnership work in your case? Somebody does the research, somebody does the day-to-day writing. You split the chores.
We mostly split it up in terms of I researched the history of it all, and he mostly focused, focused in part on the Trump administration. Although I did some of the work relating to that too. I mean, I was well aware, for instance, the most amazing aspect of it was that Trump owned a team in the USFL. And I did some research on that to discover the only reason he owned that team in the USFL is that he wanted to take his team and place it in the NFL. And that's how he was going to do it. He was going to make a good team in the USFL and then take it to the NFL. But what he did is very shortly after buying his team, he told the rest of the league owners, playing in the spring is not what I want to do. I want to play in the fall. I want to go head-to-head with the NFL. And all the owners told him the same thing. We've done the research, and if you do that, we're going to go bankrupt. But Trump was such a bully that he twisted a bunch of arms and got them to play football in the fall against the NFL, and of course they went bankrupt. At the same time, he's going to Pete Rozelle and saying to Pete Rozelle, "Look, I've got this team, and I want this team to be in the NFL." And Rozelle actually told him that if you were the last owner on earth, I wouldn't want you in the NFL. And of course, he's telling the other owners that they're negotiating. After hearing that, he said, "Oh, we're negotiating." He wasn't negotiating at all. He was lying, is what he was doing. And so he said, "Okay, so we're going bankrupt. The NFL is a monopoly. We're going to sue them under the antitrust." So they went to court, sued the NFL. Trump was the primary person prosecuting the case. And at the end, the jury came back and awarded the USFL $1. $1.
Oh.
So one of the NFL owners goes into his wallet and pulls out a buck and hands it to him. So the interesting thing about it, though, is that Trump was only interested in owning that team for his own benefit. In other words, to take that team to the NFL. He didn't care about what happened to the league. And, of course, what he did was he bankrupted the damn thing. It's just
perfect analogy to what he's doing to our country.
Well, that's exactly right, and that's why I felt so strongly that the whole incident belonged in our book and put it there. So at any rate, we got Randy on the line. I'm very much interested in talking to Randy about his remembrances of the senior league. He was such an important part of our team. And I have a sneaky suspicion it was a very important team for him.
It was, Peter. First of all, I was, man, you can keep talking about your book, buddy. That sounds wonderful. I can't wait for it to come out, and so that, as a great writer that you are. But yes, what I was thinking about before I came on the show, and I really enjoyed you interviewing me many years ago. I remember us sitting on the bus and answering questions, and I really didn't know. I said, well, what is this all about? I had never had anybody approach me that they wanted to put me in their book. I thought, wow. And I didn't even know what was going on. All that I thought with the senior league, Peter, is that I had after I had retired from Major League Baseball, I thought, I just haven't gotten enough of this yet. And so I was working construction, and some of the guys on my teammates or my coworkers, I should say, with the construction company, they came and said, well, we're playing in a a hardball league. It's a real good league. You want to come and play? And I said, well, you know what? I'm not pitching anymore. I always like to hit anyway. So if I can hit and play the outfield, it would be a blast. And so when Tug McGraw approached me and said, you know what? He says, Randy, they're forming this semi-pro, or not semi, you know, whatever you want to call it. There's, you know, after the major league, old timers, a senior league or whatever. I said, you got to be kidding me. He said, yeah, it's in Florida. I had no idea that this was any kind of a serious thing. I just thought that I was just taking my mess around league after baseball that I was doing in New Jersey, and I was just going to take it and play in Florida. But I found out in a real big hurry that Bobby Tolan was pretty serious about that, as I'm sure you saw that also.
Absolutely, he was. That's exactly right. And what was amazing to me, that you and these other ball players, many of whom hadn't really played competitively for a few years, I mean, you had to be 35 to play in the league. You couldn't be younger than that. And so a lot of the players had been out of Major League Baseball sometimes 3, 4, or 5 years, and yet when they still came back to play, they still had it. They still had the skills. It was amazing. I mean, you started in the rotation for the Pelicans, and you were just tremendous.
Well, thank you. I was opening day pitcher. It blew me away. Doc Ellis,
right.
Everybody probably remembers Doc. He was the pitching coach, and
right.
He comes up to me, and I think I only threw on the side a couple times. Before the season started, we did our practices and stuff, and Doc tells me, he goes, wow, you're still throwing really good. You're opening day pitcher. I go, what? You know, they're actually, I don't know if I'm sure you know that they were putting, like, they're actually saying, okay, who's going to be the Cy Young Award winner of the senior league? I said, who's going to be the MVP? And I'm thinking, man, this is serious. And then I knew that it was really serious when Bobby Tolan did his first team meeting, and he had his game face on. And then just like in the major leagues where the starting pitchers, one of their jobs was during infield practice before the game, they needed to go and hit fungos, which is, hitting fly balls to the outfielders for them to stay warmed up before the game. And I missed my assignment hitting fly balls, and Bobby Tolan, he signed me. He put $100. He could find me $100. He put this receipt on my stool and said, wow. You just find $100. And I thought, oh boy, I thought, wow, it's on.
Well, what was interesting about Tolan and the Pelicans was that it was different from a lot of the other teams. In other words, the Winter Haven Super Sox was a team made up of former Red Sox players, Bill Lee and a bunch of these other guys, and they were sort of doing it as a, sort of for the fun of it. And there was a team in Port St. Lucie. It was the Port St. Lucie Mets.
Yes,
these were a bunch of Mets. And some of those guys were like 45 and 50 years old. They couldn't compete with you guys. Tolan wanted the youngest players he could find. He wanted the best players he could find. He decided very, very early that if he was going to be the manager of this team, he was going to lead this team to a championship and somehow get himself back into Major League Baseball, either as a coach or a manager. That was his plan. Unfortunately, it didn't work out that way. I wish it had, but he had so much baggage as a player. He was such a pain in the ass to a couple of the teams that I guess that they remembered that and they never brought him back. But he would have made a perfectly wonderful Major League manager.
And
that was one sad story that he never made it back, but there was another one. There was a catcher named Benton.
Yep.
And tell that story, Peter.
Butch Benton was our catcher. Now, he was an interesting guy. He was a religious guy. He had 8 kids. He was sort of scraping along when the senior league came along, as a lot of the players were. And Benton had been the number 1 draft choice for the New York Mets as a catcher, and never quite made it. I mean, he was injured, things happened to him, he never quite made the major leagues. And in the senior league, he was a star. He was an absolute star. He was a wonderful catcher. He was a terrific hitter. He was a team leader. He was everything you'd want in a catcher on your team. And he actually went to AAA after the season was over with the Chicago Cubs. And I was rooting for him so hard, but there was a certain prejudice against the senior league. We made a very, very bad mistake in making Curt Flood our commissioner. And Curt Flood, as you know, had sued Major League Baseball after he was traded from Philadelphia to Washington, or one team to another, St. Louis to Philadelphia. He sued Major League Baseball, and they never forgave him for that. So he was the commissioner of our league, and so somebody in baseball must have decided, we don't care, we're not taking one single player from the senior league into the majors. And they didn't. And Butch Benton deserved to be on a major league team, and he never made it there.
I don't know if you know it, Peter, but Dick Bosman, you remember him being on the team, and he was a pitching coach with the Baltimore Orioles in the minor leagues, and he took me to spring training.
Is that right? Fantastic.
Yeah, I went to spring training with the Baltimore Orioles, and the reason I picked them is because Frank Robinson was my manager with the Giants, and I thought, boy, if I show up and Frank sees me, because I actually had a couple good years. I had a good year with Frank there with the Giants, and I was a part of that collusion deal that year, and I became a free agent. I had a heck of a year that year, and no one picked me up. But I tell a story in my book how when I went to spring training, I had a locker right next to Pete Rose Jr., and I had an beat up baseball glove, and Pete Rose Jr. says, "Hey, instead of give this kid a glove, he says, well, give this old man a glove." So, yeah.
And yet you did not make it back to the majors, right?
I didn't even get a chance. I think they were doing Dick a big favor.
Okay.
Dick he has some influence in the league, and quite frankly, my desire to play at that level again wasn't there. I found out in a real big hurry that my mind wasn't there to go through the rigors for spring training. And I finally just went to him and I said, I just can't do this. And but anyway, yeah, I went to spring training actually, and then John Matlack, he went to the Padres brass and asked them if they'd bring me to spring. So anyway, that's my story.
No. Well, part of the problem, I suspect, you were 36, 37 years old at the time. And my guess is they didn't want to, spend any money on somebody not only who was from the senior league, but who was that old, would be my guess.
Exactly. I think that, I was beat up and stuff, but, at least I gave it a shot.
Absolutely. The one thing that the senior league did for a number of the people in it, like Dick Bosman ended up with the Rays. The Devil Rays, as eventually he became in charge of the minor league pitchers. And he was there for many, many years. He had a wonderful career as a coach with the Rays. And there were a number of other players who had played in our league who ended up also as coaches, both in the majors and in the minors.
Well, Dick Bosman, he was a great guy. So.
Absolutely a great guy. Oh, I know. I've got his Washington Senators cap sitting here in my office. He gave it to me.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Well, I think he threw a no-hitter with the A's, didn't he, or something like that?
He certainly did. He certainly threw a no-hitter, all right. He did that. And he was very good with us. He pitched very well with us. Doc Ellis pitched very well with us. Doc Ellis was our closer. Doc Ellis, he was I love that guy. Doc Ellis was hilarious. I don't know if you remember it, but when I first wanted to write this book about the Senior League, I went to where is the Breakers Hotel? That's Key West, West Palm Beach. The Breakers Hotel is in Palm Beach, and I went to a meeting of all the owners. And when the meeting was over, I decided I wanted to spend the season with the West Palm Beach Tropics, which was owned by John Henry, who now owns the Boston Red Sox. And so I went to the meeting and I told their PR guy that I wanted to spend the season with the Tropics, and he said fine. I got a call from this guy the next day saying, "We don't want you." And the reason he didn't want me is that I had written a book called Personal Fouls, where I'd gotten Jim Valvano, the coach of North Carolina State basketball, I'd gotten the guy fired. And he was a friend of Valvano's. So in a panic, I went to Jim Morley, who was the guy who founded the league, and I said, what am I going to do? I need to find a team. And Morley said to me, listen, I own the St. Pete Pelicans. You come and spend the season with us. And I said, fabulous. So I drive down from Connecticut, and I get there on October 31st, 1989, and the next day is the first day of practice for all the Pelicans. So I go into the office, and Tolan sits me down and says, we have a problem. And I said, what's that? He says, the players don't want you. I said, why don't the players want me? They said, well, the players don't want some guy snooping around their business and hanging around. And meanwhile, while Tolan is telling me this, Doc Ellis is walking around my chair, and he's going, loser writer, loser writer, loser writer.
You're
so
kidding
Tolan
me.
says, no. So Tolan says to me, he says, I'll tell you what.
No pressure.
No pressure. Tolan says to me, tell you what, the guys are having a meeting. Why don't you go in there and talk to them and tell them what you're doing and see maybe they'll let you spend the season with the team.
I remember that. I remember that.
Yeah, and I did that. I told them what I was doing, and I said to them, look, you want to see what I'm writing about you? I'm more than welcome to show you. You know, basically all of you guys are playing baseball again for the love of the game. This is a book about the love of the game. And the meeting was over. Nobody said a word to me. The next day, we had to get on the bus to go to Winter Haven to play the Winter Haven Super Sox, which was our first game.
Which I started.
Which you started. So I'm saying to myself, can I get on this bus? Nobody said a word to me. So I brought all my stuff. I got all dressed up. I walked on the bus. Nobody said word one to me. And I spent the rest of the season with the Pelicans. And it was wonderful. It was absolutely wonderful. I made wonderful friendships, you know, during those 4 months. It was spectacular.
Well, you're such a low-key and great guy, Peter. So I mean, I remember it was so easy being around you. It wasn't like the hustle and bustle during the season where, you know, there was so much competition. So in those days, Ralph and I have talked about how the competition of the sports writers and stuff like that. It was so low-key, and you did a great job, buddy. Obviously.
Well, I mean, what I had going for me more than anything else is that I loved the game as much as you did.
Right. Yeah.
And I was just so honored, really honored, that you all would allow me to spend that time with you. And it was spectacular. It was, and the book turned out to be wonderful. They still talk about that book, and it's like 30 years later.
Peter, it is perhaps, I won't say the greatest baseball book I ever read, because there was Dynasty, Bums, and a few others. But for me, given everything I was going through in life at that time, we've talked about, it was a savior. It was like I told you I found it at the library. I remember sitting there and opening it up, and any book that you say to yourself, I've just found a new friend in this book. Yeah. And that's what I was telling Randy about this the other day, that book is what got us together, because I was just another podcaster initially when I contacted you if you would appear on my show. And I doubt if you would have, if all I wanted to do was talk about Dynasty or this, that, or the other thing. But my passion was that book. And turns out you enjoyed writing that book as much as any of the others. And it had as much influence on the rest of your life as any of the others. Absolutely. If not more. Hell, it gave you a St. Petersburg.
That's exactly what happened. No, as I drove across the Bayway for the first time, and I saw the Don Cesar Hotel, which is pink, and then the sun was going down, and it was 73, 74 degrees on October 31st. I thought to myself, this is heaven. This is unbelievable.
Tell the folks where you were coming from in the frigid weather of...
Right. I was coming from Ridgefield, Connecticut. I had left snow.
Right.
Yeah. And just, and the other thing about St. Petersburg, the city, is that it is such a beautiful, beautiful city. A fellow by the name of Pointer, who ran the newspaper, left miles and miles of waterfront to the city. So there are no, unlike Clearwater, which is the shoreline is filled with giant skyscrapers and hotels and people can't swim on the beaches for the most part because of the buildings there. St. Petersburg is wide open. There are no big buildings anywhere along the shoreline, and it's just a beautiful, beautiful place to live. And I've been very fortunate that I've been able to live here all those years.
Yeah. Well, Randy doesn't live in that bad a place either. Northern California.
Doesn't. No. Well, no. I was going to ask Randy about pitching that very first game against the Winter Haven Super Sox, and it was a game that we won. I mean, it was a very, very interesting game because Bill Lee was the manager of the Red Sox team, and he's a friend of mine. He's a lovely, lovely guy, but he was not taking this nearly as seriously as Tolan and Doc and Randy and the rest of the guys. And so Lee pitched a little. He played right field a little. He screwed up a ball in the outfield, which cost them, and we ended up winning the game.
I remember the biggest memory for me, Peter and Ralph, is that I got to see the players that I idolized that I was playing against. I always wanted to be able to play against a Bill Lee or to you saw him on the TV and saw how crazy and goofy he was, but how much he loved the game. And I used him as an example, and then some of the old timers that I played with, like Raleigh Fingers and guys that Ferguson Jenkins. I always wanted to be able to say that I played against Ferguson Jenkins. Just some of the old timers like that, and it was just so eye opening for me, and it was a great memory, and shoot, I would never ever want to. Let's put it this way: I'm just really happy it happened in my life.
Yeah, no, I know it. I mean, the what really struck me as much as anything else is here we were playing in Florida towns, in a league, the senior professional league. Nobody really had ever heard of, quite frankly, and yet we were on the radio. Jack Weirs was the play-by-play guy, and I did the color on the Pelican games. And we had a fandom. We probably had 800, 900 people come to each of the games. It was a nice crowds that we had, and some of the games, especially the weekend games, we had even more people. I mean, the whole thing was wonderful. It really was. And you talk about John Matlack. The opportunity to sit and watch a guy like Matlack pitch was just fantastic. I mean, most people do not realize how talented major league ball players are. I mean, part of it is that they're playing against each other, and so you really can't see that the major league ball players are so much more talented than the minor league ball players, are so much more talented than the college ball players, are so much more talented than the high school ball players. I mean, there are tiers. And these guys, even though they hadn't played for 2 or 3 or 4 years, I would say the senior league was good AAA. Our Pelican team would have won the AAA championship. I'm pretty sure of that.
I'll tell you what I like about it, and Randy and I were talking about when a player, last week, we were talking about when a player retires, how does one handle that, the competitive edge, where it's almost like you're in neutral, but the wheels are still spinning.
Yeah, you go play golf.
That's true.
Yeah, you go play golf.
Or you go and do some pickup games like I was talking about with your construction workers, right? And I remember Tug McGraw telling me he did that too, and I had always dreamt of being, I was telling Ralph this, of being an outfielder. And heck, when they drafted me, the Phillies drafted me, I was disappointed because I said, well, I was an All-America hitter, and I was a pretty good pitcher in high school, and then I said, well, what am I? They said, well, right now the Phillies needed pitching, and you're a left-hander, so you're going to be a pitcher for now. And so I never got to fulfill that dream of being an outfielder. So what I did is when I retired, I told them I wanted to go and play the outfield and hit home runs. so I fulfilled that dream.
Yeah, that's fabulous.
Did you get to play the outfield in the senior league at all?
No.
No, I didn't.
No.
Heck no, Peter, not with Bobby being the manager. Forget that one.
That's exactly right. No. They had Steve Henderson. They had some wonderful players out there. Who they have? Lamar Johnson they had out there. Steve Kemp we certainly had out there. Kenny Landreau was our center fielder. No.
Can you imagine?
Yeah.
Lamar Johnson was one hell of a hitter.
You're not kidding. You are not kidding. He was spectacular. He absolutely was.
The ball came off his bat as fast as anybody I could remember watching. He was just terrific. And I got to meet him when he was manager of Stockton, California in the minors. And I was doing my Tops gig where I was signing players to contracts and what have you. And I remember Lamar Johnson telling me that the hardest hitting hitter that he played with or against was Dick Allen.
Yeah,
and I said,
sure. Otherwise known as Richie.
Is there a reason that he's not in the Hall of Fame? And Lamar just looks at me like, is there a reason? And isn't it obvious there's a reason?
It was the racism of Philadelphia, clearly.
Exactly.
No, I know.
And what's really sad, how much has it really changed? Jackie Robinson, it's been 50, 60 years, 70 years, more. This is crazy.
No, what has really changed is that for young African Americans who want to end up as professionals. They don't want to spend 6 years in the minor leagues making $200 a month. They want to become basketball players and go straight to the NBA, or they want to be football players and go straight to the NFL. That's the thing. When I was coaching Little League here in St. Petersburg, I went down to the South Side to get some African American kids to come and play, and they laughed at me. We don't want to play baseball. We're playing football. And that's just, as sort of what's happened in the last 20 years. I mean, it's not a coincidence that a lot of the players are coming from the Dominican Republic and Venezuela and Mexico and Japan. A lot of the great players are not playing baseball in this United States.
Randy, how has the game changed since you were signed by the Phillies as a 20-year-old? What's the number one thing that's changed in the game that you've noticed?
I had Larry Boa when he was managing the Phillies, and I went and did a celebrity softball game at Veterans Stadium in Philadelphia, and Larry said to me, Blade, which was my nickname, he says, you don't want to come back and do this anymore. He says, because the game is gotten to be such a business where in the old days the kids used to line the sidelines and stuff like that and sign autographs, and to where in the parking lot after the game the kids had access to the players, and Larry said that just doesn't happen anymore. It's gotten to be, I personally can say that I didn't make a lot of money, and then with the money being so much involved, it's turned into instead of a game, it's turned into such a business. And as you know, I mean, they're even taking, and instead of a very experienced pitching coach that knew the game and came up through the game, there's many of us that really can't be managers or coaches now. I say mostly coaches because it's gotten so computerized that they're actually, instead of looking at a curveball and being able to see how good of a break it has or how the hitter reacts to the pitch, they're actually looking at it in slow motion and seeing how many revolutions the ball has to decide whether you've got a good curveball or not. It's just gotten so the game has gotten so business-sized, or, for me, the lack of a better word, that the old ball game is gone.
No. I mean, you don't see the Earl Weavers managing anymore. They don't want people like that. They want people who go to the sabermetrics and look at the numbers and somehow, pat all their players on the back and make them all feel happy and at home. It is a different game.
That's why it was so nice when Dusty Baker got hired to manage the Astros. I thought that was terrific. And Randy, Dusty, this was 2-3 weeks ago, Dusty introduced Randy to the Sports Hall of Fame of Sacramento. You are now a member, Randy, and it was Dusty Baker that introduced you the night before he was hired by the Astros.
Oh, that's fabulous. Just fabulous.
Isn't it? That
was just unbelievable memory. If we have time, Ralph and Peter, but when I was voted into the Sacramento Sports Hall of Fame, he asked me who I wanted to be my presenter, and I knew through T.C. Martin, one of the guys that was the MC and part of making up the Sacramento Sports Hall of Fame. I said, well, Dusty Baker was one of the first inductees there, and I was wondering if Dusty would do it, since he was when I first came to the Phillies as a kid. Dusty had friends, Gary Maddox, Gary Matthews, and stuff like that. So after the season was over, and I was my first couple of years in the major leagues, I got to know Dusty. Plus, I played against him when he was with the Dodgers. I pitched against him in the playoffs, and then we were teammates with the San Francisco Giants. And we always called each other homeboy because we heck, our high schools were only a few miles apart, and I knew his brother Vic, and so I asked Dusty, and at the same time, the scandal with the sign stealing thing came along, and I asked Dusty, when I had asked Dusty, he had said yes, and I'm up there and Dusty's been doing the interviews with the Astros, and he had a chance to, he was doing interviews with the Mets and with the Red Sox, but mostly the Astros, and when I was giving my speech, I said, thank you so much, Dusty, and as we speak, the phone might start ringing. It might be the Astros asking you if you would take the job. And lo and behold, read in the paper the next day that he had gotten the job, and it, I looked like a genius. But I was very honored. I was so happy, and for all the pressure that, as we could read right now, is going on with this thing. Especially with the Astros, I can't think of anybody that could handle that situation better than Dusty. I'm really pulling for him.
You are absolutely right. He's got such a marvelous reputation, but this is not going to be an easy year for him. Wherever they go, those fans are absolutely livid. The Red Sox fans are furious. The Rays fans are furious. The Dodger fans are furious. I would have thought that this thing would have just disappeared and that would have been the end of it. But it's not that way. It is a big mess right now. People want retribution against these guys.
And it's not helping for people like Corey Bellinger and stuff like that, just chiming in. I mean, you can't do anything about it, Corey. You just go play the game and be quiet the way I feel. And because what he's doing, just because he's trying to do his sour grapes thing, he doesn't know if he would have won or not, but for sure, he's stirring up the fans. He's stirring, because here's a guy that's having a lot of success right now, and so by him stirring it up, I don't think him as being a young player, and after me playing, a lot of years in the major leagues in baseball, I don't think he has any idea how dangerous he can make this game, because there's some people out there, there's some players out there that will take no prisoners, believe me, and I hope nobody gets hurt.
No, you're right. Well, the commissioner has come down with a ruling now that if pitchers, throw at the Houston batters deliberately, there's going to be hell to pay, and a lot of money. So they're trying to keep it.
And how is that good for baseball if you're as John Smoltz said on MLB Tonight earlier today, it takes away from the game if you're not allowing the pitcher the inside of the plate. And it's
they're going to allow the pitcher the inside of the plate. They're not going to allow the pitcher to throw at some guy's head. There's a difference.
Well,
I know.
Obviously there's a difference, but there's the intent, and if you're throwing towards the inside of the plate and one gets away,
they always know when one gets. They know when one gets away. Randy will tell you that. They know what the difference between one getting away and one intended to plunk some guy in the middle of his back.
That's true.
Well, just put it this way. I always like to say, they say, well, what's the difference between a major leaguer and a minor leaguer? The major leaguer can take that outside 1/2 inch and throw a 95 to 100 mile an hour fastball consistently there. So if it gets away, it can get away. I mean, it can, but you like Peter says, you'll know the difference. And the sad thing about it is when you're throwing 100 miles an hour, it only takes one time to either end somebody's life or ruin them. So it worries me what's going on. We'll wait and see what happens. But it's going to be a very interesting year, and it's going to be a heck of a storm for Dusty to weather also.
Yeah, well, they picked somebody who's got the right temperament, who's got the right experience, he's just the perfect guy to pick to handle that situation. He'll do a fine job.
beloved in baseball. I haven't heard anybody say anything bad about Dusty Baker, the person, ever. I mean, he criticized him as a manager. He wasn't known for doing all that well with pitchers, this, that, and the other thing. But I'm talking as a person, which is so much more important.
Absolutely.
I just put this down when you said it. You mentioned earlier, before we go, you mentioned Curt Flood being the commissioner.
Yep.
You've told me stories in the past. What a strange egg this guy was.
He was. He was. I mean, the strangest thing I ever heard about Curt Flood, quite frankly, is that he had this reputation of being an artist. He had gone to Copenhagen, I believe, or Amsterdam. He went to Amsterdam in Holland, where he lived after the whole mess with baseball, and positioned himself as being this very fine artist that did portraits and landscapes and so forth and so on. And I came to find out that he himself never painted any of those paintings.
Now, you told me that once before, and I
so bizarre. It's just
I
so
couldn't
bizarre.
find that on any interview. I searched many interviews, couldn't find. I'm glad you repeated it, because that is incredible. You said it. That's bizarre. He was known for that. That was like a second career. He sold paintings and he had some guy just paint them?
Yeah. It's like sort of like a Bernie Madoff thing. Sort of, you know. I don't know. It's just I just found it to be very, very strange. And as the commissioner of the senior league, I got to sit with him a few times. I don't know. He didn't have a whole lot to say. I don't really have any memories of my conversations with him. And they let him go. I mean, at some point, he was not the commissioner the second year, and I'm not sure why.
And to be clear, it was the only championship won, because in the middle of the second year, the league folded.
Day.
Am I correct?
Christmas Day. Randy, that was the saddest thing. Christmas Day. The first thing that happened, the owners of the Orlando team, stole $13 million from the Detroit mob.
Oh boy!
And this guy in December of the first year disappeared. The guy disappeared, and he was never found. They never found this guy's body. No. They never, and that was the first thing financially that hurt the league. The second thing that hurt the league was that the two guys who owned the Fort Myers team, one guy was what's the very wealthy people in Delaware?
The DuPont.
DuPont.
DuPont?
The one guy was a DuPont, exactly. The one guy was a DuPont, and the other guy was a cokehead. And the DuPont discovered that the cokehead was putting his money up his nose, and that's what happened on Christmas Day. The DuPont guy said, "I'm out of here. I'm gone," and that was the end of our league. That was it. It was over. Yeah.
Go ahead, Pete.
I was going to ask you, what did you do? You must have been so disappointed to find out that this league was no longer going to exist.
I was disappointed. I tried to get a hold of Morley's, and he said the league's probably not going to go. And this is when I had come back and had gotten into the heavy drinking, and this actually was the where I was starting into my new lows, why I wrote my book and had gotten so much trouble. I wish that I would have gone back and played. Maybe it kept me out of trouble, but this
probably would have.
Excuse me?
It probably would have if you had kept playing.
If I'd have kept playing, it probably would have. But I just after that, I had gone downhill like crazy, and
wow.
So I had to write a book.
Hey, Peter, the ending of the book, though, is really happy. Randy has kicked his addictions, and he is on the way back, and he is really an inspiration to an awful lot of people, and will continue to be. Yeah,
that is just marvelous, just terrific.
Yeah,
really. Yeah. Randy,
hey guys, this is
such
terrific.
a joy to be on this team, to be able to
listening
spend the time
to
with
you talk about the old days and listening to the passion in your voice, especially knowing how that book influenced this entire show. There would not be a Peter Golenbock on this show were it not for this book. Conversely, there would not be a network if were it not for that book. And Randy Lerch, newest podcaster on the network, great that you two got together again. This really makes me feel good. One of my all-time favorite days in podcasting and in life. This is terrific.
Well,
come back again,
so much,
Randy. Come back to Peter's show again.
Thank you. I look forward to talking to you again, Peter.
It's always a pleasure. Really wonderful. Thank
Peter,
you.
you can guest on Randy's show sometime, too. That would be nice.
Oh, I'd be happy to. All right.
Beautiful.
Take care.
Thank you guys for a great evening. You made me smile.
Me too.
All right.
You too.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. The show was Golenbock University, the old professor, Peter Golenbock, not the old professor, only one old professor. And Peter will never be old. Peter Golenbock, guest is Randy Lerch. God's Miracle on Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. Listen for that. Thank you, gentlemen, and thank you, everyone, for listening. Adios. The proceeding has been a Comfortably Zoned Network production. You are advised to keep your dreams wet, your humor dry, your children and grandchildren out of military recruiting offices and off the laps of clerics who wear dresses. Thank you for listening, everyone. Happy trails.